Howdy everybody in YouTube land. This video is a little bit different for my channel. This isn't the usual let's repair something and show the repair process and post it. This is more about the inner sanctum of my world and autism in general. Most people know, not everybody knows, but most people know that I have autism spectrum disorder, which back then it was Asperger's syndrome for me, but it's now considered autism. So with that aside, this video is more about exploring my version of the autism spectrum. And if that's not your thing, that's okay. You can go ahead and click off this video and wait for the next release. This is more of a different path and an interlude talking about my obsessions and how autism affects me. So, what you're looking at in front of you is my vacuum fluorescent display collection. Now, I've got way more than this, but this is the stuff that was in one of the bins that I could easily get to that wasn't all wrapped up into cocoons, because I have bare glass like that are just wrapped up with foam and bubble wrapping and stuff like that to protect them. These were only loosely protected with bubble wrap sandwiches, and even then it still resulted in damage, because look what we have going on right here. See the white spots? That means it's lost its vacuum, and that is now junk. So I need to get rid of that. But the only reason why it's in that bin is because I forgot about it, or didn't know about it, or perhaps I saved it for parts, who knows. Anywho, so backstory, which is what this video is about. This all started when I was about 4 years old. And I remember Mom had a Pioneer stereo system. She had the 303 receiver and the 303 speakers, which were rated for about 80 watts, something like that. And at that time, she didn't have a Pioneer cassette deck. She had a Technics cassette deck. Same one my Aunt Sharon had before she passed away. And I remember I was like 4 years old, going on 5, and the Paula Abdul tape was playing inside the tape deck. And I remember that exact view meter right there. That one. I'll zoom into it so you get a better look. That exact one. That one right there. I remember when that cassette deck was playing the song, and it just literally captured me. And I remember that bright fluorescent blue-green glow, just being mesmerized by that. And for me, learning later in life, it was a sensory stimulation. It was a stim, essentially. So with autistic people, there's a lot of stereotyping that happens with, oh, well, they're in the trains and stuff like that. Well, this is my version of trains, right? This is a diversion from like the retro computing stuff or whatever, but no, this is my version of trains. And that is my earliest memory I have, is with that particular display right there. And ever since then, I've always had this hyperfixation on that type of display. And later on in life, I eventually learned what it was. You know, as I got older and started to understand electronics a bit more. But I get questions all the time from people. Well, how did you get started in this? How did you learn all this stuff? Or if you're starting out brand new, how do you, questions like that. So the only way to really explain myself is we've got to start with the beginning here, the hyperfixation. So for me, this stuff was a stim. It really was, because I remember when I was a child and I was watching that display, I remember I would take apart my dad's beta machines, VCRs, stuff like that, which had those displays in it, and trying to get them to light up with like 9-volt batteries, and I could never get it to work because I didn't really understand what was going on, right? I was a child. But I always been disappointed because I would tear it apart, and I remember being a kid, I would take the display out and, make believe that the display was actually working, and it created in my imagination, even though it's not working. I remember being on the swing set, listening to music, because I would constantly have my Walkman or whatever, and then listen to music for hours on end on the weekends in the summertime or whatever when I wasn't in school. and just have these displays kind of like set out in the yard somewhere where I could just stare at it. Even though it wasn't working, I would stare at it. It was a form, I don't know how to explain it. It was like a form of stimulation for me. So eventually I'd get my hands on cassette decks that did work, and I would use those. And also, I remember I would take cassette decks apart. Once I got better at electronics later in life, I remember I would take cassette decks apart and figure out how to make those VU meters work outside of the cassette deck. So I didn't have to have that big bulky cassette deck in the way, and I'd have the VU meter just kind of hooked up into the like a electronic kit from Radio Shack or whatever, and or somehow figure out how to tie it into my Walkman and then tie my headphones into that. I used to do that all the time. I remember when I was at the campground, I would have one of those little VU meters like that I could get to run off of 9 volts, and have a speaker and a Walkman. Or back then I had my Home Alone Talk Boy. I'm sure people of a certain age would know what those are. I'd have my Home Alone Talk Boy wired into the VU meter, and then that's wired into this like leftover boombox speaker all laid out on a little table, and I would be sitting on the swing behind me just rocking away while staring at the VU meter, listening to music and just watching it all go. As I got a little older and learned how to wire all that stuff up when I was about 10, 11 years old. So anyway, then I remember I got a Pioneer CTF 900, and the CTF 900 had problems. It was out of the trash. I was like 12 years old at the time, 6th grade. The CTF 900 didn't work with the belt issues and stuff like that. But I remember trying to get the VU meter to work without the belts connected, or without the mechanism running, and I could kind of get it to work, but it didn't really want to work. And I remember I gutted it out like that, and I was trying to figure out how to hook up 9-volt batteries to it like I did these. And then anyone that's worked on those decks know these need multiple voltages. You need a filament voltage, you need an anode voltage. In this case, those use negative voltage. So the battery, I just couldn't get any of it to work right. And I remember I took the bare VFD to my 6th grade class. And I remember asking my teacher, Mr. Brown, how do I make this thing work? Can you help me here? Because I know he was very sciencey and kind of into that stuff. And unfortunately, he didn't like me bringing glass to school. So I remember when he confiscated it from me, and eventually it got thrown away at school. So that was unfortunate. But anyways, that is the story behind why, I kind of got into VFD displays. It captured me. Like with autistic people, one of the common things you hear is how pretty lights or sensory stimulation tend to capture you. Well, this was my form of it. Watching the VU meters move and listening to music and stuff like that was a form of stimulation for me. And I remember I would sit on the floor and rock for hours. This is why my knees are shot and I can't use my knees hardly anymore, is because I would sit on my legs in the floor for like 5 hours straight, listening to music, staring at these VU meters going. That's what I did when I was a kid growing up in the 90s. So I was one of those weird kids. So that's a little window into my inner world. So I collected all of these over the years because I had this grandiose plan to try to make a media player or something, and to pick the best VFD, and I don't know. It just never worked out. It never did. I don't know if it ever will. I still have plans to, but who knows. And I would use this as a form of sensory stimulation from childhood all the way up through at least my early 20s. By the time I hit my mid-20s and later, I never really used this stuff again. I mean, yeah, I have the collection of it. Obviously I have the collection of it. I started collecting it over the years, starting in the very early 2000s. I got these from eBay because a lot of these came from either eBay or they came from actual decks that I parted out, because in those days, cassette decks bookshelf stereos and stuff like that were a dime a dozen. They were worthless. They were being e-wasted. They were broken. Things like that. It just really wasn't viable to work on that stuff, right? So that's where I got a lot of this stuff. And some of the stuff I got on eBay. Like this stuff came from eBay. In fact, I have a very early YouTube video demonstrating one of these, playing around with it. And then my first YouTube video was one of these guys right there. Because these were on eBay for like $5 a piece back then. So I bought a few of them and I played with one of them. And that's as far as I ever got with it. And then I have this one, which I never did anything with. But no, I collected a lot of these over the years. But you'll notice a theme here is I'm very gravitated towards audio style fluorescent displays. And again, the reason is simple, is because for me it was a form of stimulation watching it with music, but also that very early 4-year-old childhood core memory that I had with that one right there. That's what sparked it all for all of this stuff. And that's my version of the autism. And one thing you'll know when it comes to autistic people, when you meet someone with autism, you met someone with autism, because autism presents differently in every person. It's a spectrum. And we all have different symptoms of different grades. We all have different, and it's tied to different experiences. I mean, there's a lot of commonalities, don't get me wrong, like monotropic thinking and stuff like that, but there's a lot of differences too. Like this was my version. This was before I understood and knew what computers were. This was my version of my stim and hyperfixation back then. So fast forward, I collected a lot of this stuff. Some of this stuff just to have, but some of it's stuff to that grandiose plan that never worked out. I remember we used to get parts for cars at junkyards in the 2000s, early 2010s, and that's where I got that thing, because I remember there was a Buick there. I think it was a Buick. It was parted out, parts car, up on blocks, and I remember seeing this in the dashboard, so I went ahead and grabbed it. Paid very little for it, and then now I've got it, and it looks cool. It was too cool to pass up, but nothing ever happened with it. It just sits there. It looks pretty, right? And it sits in a box. That's the biggest travesty, is all this stuff sits in a box. And that brings me to my next point, and that is this. I don't really use this stuff much as a stim anymore, because now as I've become an adult, my emotional bandwidth and sensory stimulation bandwidth is extremely limited, because my time is being taken up. I don't have the time window for this stuff anymore. And when I say time, I don't mean time in the physical world, in the physical sense. When I mean time, I mean my internal construct of time, my emotional processing centers, my demand avoidance and stuff like that. So, for example, I spend so much time at work doing work-related things, coming home and trying to unwind and getting locked into dopamine hits with YouTube and all this modern technology stuff that comes after all of this, that I don't have any emotional window for this stuff anymore. So I don't find myself staring hours on end trying to stimulate my sensory stuff and trying to calm my nervous system down with this anymore, because I don't need to, because I don't have the time to do it, as all of my time emotionally is being taken up by just everyday life, right? And it sucks, because I get home, I get stressed out, I'm burnt out, I don't have any motivation or bandwidth to work on this stuff anymore either, right? So it's unfortunate. So it's become less of about usability and more of a Hot Wheels like collection for me, to put it into a better term. But I do want to do something someday, and this is where I need some ideas. I kind of want to make since I don't really use this stuff, but I would like it to work, I kind of want to make a collage of sorts. So in an artsy form, like a retro themed artsy form, I'm thinking like maybe shadow boxes with not all of them, but some of this stuff inside. that work. I could like hang on a wall or put on a desk or something. A couple different shadow boxes of some of this stuff hooked up and working, but arranged in like an artsy way. But I don't know. I'm having creator's block when it comes to that. So if anyone has any thoughts, let me know. I'd appreciate it. But the second part is, notice, and there's a lot of people in my life, and earlier on, not so much now, but earlier on, first off, I thought I was the only weirdo that collected things like this because the internet wasn't as prevalent. I wasn't connected to other people. So I thought I was the only weirdo that did stuff like this. And then when I would talk about this stuff, I always got yelled at and downvoted because they see this as a waste. And they're like, well, you know, I could use this part here, I could use this part here because I'm fixing this hi-fi stereo and the display is weak and blah, blah. I get it. I fully understand. But you got to understand, too, I collected all this stuff before any of it had any value. It was worthless. It was being scrapped. Like, that came out of an Iowa, I think a 3 CD or 5 CD bookshelf stereo that was blown up. Had a bad STK chip. You know, that one came out of another bookshelf stereo. The top display assembly is missing because it was broken. The whole face was bashed in. It was scrapped. But I saw that the audio VFD was still good, so I grabbed it. And the rest of it went to scrap. That one might have been an eBay purchase. That one was an eBay purchase. And some of the stuff came from cassette decks that were, all cassette decks were utterly worthless back then. Because what I found has happened over time is vintage electronics have gotten organized into categories. You have the elitist category and then everything else, right? Let me throw you an example. Trinitron CRT stuff. When it comes to CRTs, the Trinitron stuff is always in this elitist meme category and it has a ton of value and nobody wants to see the stuff scrapped and everybody wants to see it work and be safe, which, fair. I'm in agreement with that. But then everything else below it gets neglected. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And it's the same for this stuff when it comes to cassette decks. Yeah, there's been kind of a resurgence lately, right? And you always get you got the elitist decks like the Nakamichi or the Sony, the early Sony direct drive quartz locked frequency blah 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 Walkmans. And then on the Pioneer side, you got the CTF 1250, which I think this one is from. And of course, you have the reel-to-reel RT909, right? So people yell at me. They're like, hey, you know, I could use that because my VFD is faded and I want to get the cassette system restored. I want to get my RT909 restored or my CTF 950 restored or whatever. And that's understandable. It is. But I got all of these. I didn't scrap these decks. I bought all of those from eBay dirt cheap over 15 years ago, 20 years ago now. I've had this stuff building for over 20 years since I was a teenager. So a lot of this stuff's more modern, but a lot of this stuff is I've had for over 20 years when this stuff was worthless. You could buy a Pioneer CTF 950 20 years ago for like 20 bucks, 30 bucks. They weren't worth anything. You couldn't give them away. Now they're several $100s, and it's all electronics hit a bathtub curve like that. And the higher end ones retain and appreciate value while everything else just kind of bleh, you know. But anywho, so with that said, you know, it's like I got all this stuff, but I don't want to hoard all this stuff. So if there's someone out there that really needs a CTF 1250 display or a RT909 display, they're the same, by the way, or a CTF 950 display, I would let it go to the right person for the right price because I would love to see equipment being restored and working. But I acquired a lot of this stuff before they were worth anything. So that's the disclaimer so I don't get screamed at to justify my collection because that's happened so many times. But anyways, and then of course you've got the cheaper decks which don't really retain any value, like that little one there. And actually that one there has a story of itself. That came out of a Yamaha dual cassette deck, and that was an eBay purchase recently. But when I was a kid, I found a Yamaha cassette deck in the trash when I was riding around on my bike. The motors were broken off, so it wasn't worth anything, couldn't do anything. And once again, it was one of those things where I took the VFD display out to try to work externally even couldn't. I couldn't figure it out. So what I did was I had a make-believe situation again. So what I did was I took the display panel, and I remember with the ribbon cables and all, I wrapped it on the handlebars of my bicycle, and I pretended that was my bike radio, even though that's not a thing. But back in 1995, that was my bike radio, and that's one of the memories I have attached to that thing. So I'd like to actually get that thing hooked up and working someday, but who knows? Who knows? Who really knows? And then I think it was in 2007, I want to say, is when these Russian, Ukrainian fluorescent displays started showing up on eBay in mass. And you couldn't buy them individually when they first came on eBay. You had to buy them in lots of 50. So I bought a lot of 50 of them. I took some of the tubes off to build my own little custom thing. And I kept this one because it looks unique since it doesn't have the numbers on it. And I only had like one of those. The rest of them had all the numbers. So I kept that one. And then that left, what am I going to do about the rest of them? Therein lies the problem. I tried to get rid of them, give them away to people when there was no demand for the stuff. And again, I always thought internally that I was the only one that had interest with stuff like this. I always thought I was weird, and I was the only one that had the interest. And the only reason why I thought I was weird is because those feelings were projected by other people onto me. It's like, oh, that's weird. Why are you collecting this junk? This is junk. You don't need this stuff. You know, I'm sure you've all heard it before, right? It's just people that don't understand. This is like my own little inner world. But anywho, so I had a bunch of them left over, and I remember I eventually found some people that took some, and then I put them on eBay to sell domestically, and I think only a few of them sold. And next thing you know, I was left with like 30 of them. And then when I moved, I got rid of them. Because what was I going to do? I can't have 30 of them. Yeah, and here I am. Total walking contradiction. Anywho, so I made those, and then I kept that one, but I never finished them. I did the design back in 2008 for that one, but I didn't do anything with these. And anyways. And then I got these little tiny ones over there, which are kind of cute, so I kind of hung on to those. And then I got more VFD ones and stuff like that. But I think the times are changing. People are actually starting to restore vintage hi-fi stuff now. And enough time has passed because a VFD display has a finite life. So enough time has passed where they're starting to get dim and they're starting to get not visible. They're weak or worn out. I've seen a couple recent videos of these Pioneer ones where you can barely see the displays now. They're so worn out. I got a lot of this stuff before that was becoming a problem. Although I bought that one there and that one there back in 2009, 2010 on eBay. And those are weak. Like that one there is almost not visible. And I think I have a very early YouTube video of me playing with those. So I have those, but I'll probably never use those again because they're just weak. But the rest of them, I don't know, to be determined. I know some of the stuff isn't weak because I've played with them before. And then I got these faces from my old job where there was radios being scrapped out, so I saved all of those. I bought these little modular ones from eBay because there was an auction that were selling these in pairs, so I bought a couple of those. And that's really it. I've got so many. Yeah, there they are. There's that one and that one. And then these were given to me. And then I bought this Fluke one because I thought that fit my meter, but it does not. So I just have it now. And then that's an audio spectrum analyzer one. Audio spectrum analyzer tubes are some of my favorites, which is why I bought that one many years ago. But then the Chinese started developing their version of them with these tubes because there was tons of these tubes on eBay 15 some odd years ago, and they were selling. I'm like, well, I'll buy one. I might build a driver for it someday. And of course that someday never came. But then the Chinese eventually made them, so I bought one. But I noticed that's a blue one, and it's so dim you can't really see it that well, so I don't do anything with it. I thought about maybe putting that tube on it, but I feel like it's going to be the same problem. And then there's a VFD for a Pioneer stereo receiver. And there's another one right there in the middle for a Sony receiver, a couple Sony receivers. So anyways, that is my story when it comes to my vacuum fluorescent display collection and how it coincides with my autism. So to wrap that up, it's basically, it was a stim. It was like, ooh, cool, pretty lights. I was so mesmerized by it to the point where I was having ASMR vibes going down my spine when watching this stuff work. That's how serious I am. And then come later on, with the advent of the internet and social media and getting connected with other people, I've learned that there are a lot of people out there, still a very small minority, but there's a lot of people out there that are interested in vintage display technology and stuff like that, such as Nixies and VFD displays and neon signs and stuff like that. So it's cool. And actually, I've met other people where I've sent, because I used to have a bunch of these, and I've sent some of them off to other people who's wanted them. I said, here you go. They were very young kids at the time, late teens, just getting into the stuff. I'm sure they're probably autistic as well. And I said, here you go, have fun. Because at the end of the day, I want other people to have fun too, right? So anyways, kind of a short video, less than 30 minutes long. So if you have any comments, please feel free to leave some. I'd like to make a collage with some of these. I don't know what that looks like yet, but... Oh, a final note before I close this video off. I briefly want to go over exactly what all of these are. Even though I kind of touched on some of it, I want to specifically go through them one by one in case people are curious, because you never know. So, that one is one of those VFD displays that go on a car radio, and that is running the PT6318, which is a very common chip. The 15 is more common. So that's what that one is. I don't know what model radio it came out of, but that's one of those. We've got a bookshelf stereo type VFD display. We have our bookshelf stereo VFD larger ones. Now these were documented on Google. They were so popular and they sold so many of them in the aftermarket that they were on Google. And this one is particularly Samsung. There is the model. So I got 7 of them. I don't need 7 of them. I might keep 2, and then the rest of them can go away. I'm whatever. And then we've got that tube there. That is a Chrysler display. And then we've got that one. We've got one of these CAN VU meters. These require 2 different voltages because this guy has a different voltage level because it's darker phosphor. And this is the chip that they use. Nippon, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Alright, so we have those. Then we have these, which are scale displays. It has a micro chip. Some other little, this is the part number right there. There's some of the chips. Let me get it in the light. So that's what we have here. And then we have all of you, which is these, this one here, which is a proprietary display. We've got some nice chips we could use. An extra ROM. I don't know if this has a microcontroller. I don't think it does. You kind of have to drive it directly. I don't know. This one is an IBM style. It's got the IBM point of sale plug. So, and then we have a microcontroller there. It's a cool little 8051. So we have that one. And then these are all 3 the same, so I'll go ahead and document those. This is, what is this one? This is a 202 LDO5, which seems to be a common model number. And then these are, again, they do not have a microcontroller. These are shift registers, so you have to drive them and scan them on your own. So it'd be cool to connect a Pico to that, and you can do whatever you want with it. And then these up here are cassette deck displays for Sony cassette decks. I think these were all scrapped out of decks, that they were falling apart. So I saved those because, again, you can't save everything. What was happening is a lot of times people were bringing me these to repair at the shop that I used to work for. They would not pay the $30 it would take to get the belts and me to fix it. So they would leave it, and the resale value on eBay was like $10-20 at the time. And it's like, it ain't worth it. So I would scrap the units and save the tubes, which is exactly what I did. This was one of those. Here's another one of those. This is an NEC display. So that's that one. Another Sony, I think. Maybe not. I don't remember. Another parted out radio display. PT6311. So you have those. And that's what the can is supposed to look like. Oh, 1986. Hey, that's the same age as me. So we have that. Then here's another one of the same exact ones. It's just got a different glass. And I put it in a bag. The VFD, but you can't, Yamaha, you can't really tell what it is. It's whatever. And I don't recognize the handwriting, so it may have came that way when I bought it on eBay. That's all wrapped up, so I'm not opening that one. It's a fluke meter. Part number on that is, well, there's another TOFO, which is a 6311. You can get the data sheets and stuff on that one, so I could technically drive this thing if I want to. And then we have this guy, which uses an NEC UPD 7521 to ACN or W or whatever. It's probably a 4-bit microcomputer. There's our slider pod. There's a lot of good parts on something like this, but nothing special. Right, we got that. Then we once again we have another Sony display, I think. This is a Sony, I don't know, it doesn't say, but that's it. This one is a Yamaha XT726. There's the microcontroller. I think this was a multi-track mini disc recorder or something like that. That was an eBay purchase. I didn't scrap anything like that because I'm not gonna be that stupid. So it's getting harder to get to some of these because they're in the middle. So what I'm gonna have to do is probably start scooting them out of the way so I can. I gotta pack them back up anyways. And then this one is a. There you go, part number right there. Come on, focus. Yeah, there you go. Part number. This came out of one of those 5-channel DVD something or another. It had a bad laser, so it got scrapped out. Of course, these are the Pioneer displays, the RT909 stuff, the CTF. This is the 1250. Pretty sure that's the 1250. And then that's the 909. And then we have you, which is a display for a car. Which, I don't know, Denso. Denso would be Toyota, wouldn't it? I don't remember. Let's see what the back side is. Yeah. Oh, it's full of those leaky capacitors, too. Can't get away from those. This is a, I think that was from an Iowa. I could be wrong. There's the part number. But here's the problem with this one. Yeah, that's why I have this one. Microcontroller doesn't exist anymore, so yeah. And then here's another one of those Sony displays. This one's one of those reverse style. Yeah. So you have that one. And then we're going to work our way down this way. There is a voltmeter thing that I made years ago. This is a Russian something or another. They still sell these on eBay. Although the supply of a lot of that stuff has dried up since the Ukraine war. the Russia-Ukraine war started, so you can't really get that stuff hardly anymore. There's my double cassette deck Yamaha one. This one is, what model number? It doesn't say. That's the problem with a lot of these. There's no model numbers. And then this is a microwave oven, cook oven combo style VFD display. I'll never use this. Honestly, this thing can go away. I don't need it. This was cool. I got this on eBay because this is another one of those cassette deck VFDs that are driven by a microcontroller. It doesn't have a part number that I can see. And the thing, I thought about making a little portable MP3 player with this, but again, it's one of those things that'll never happen. There's my Technics display. There's the part number for that. And on the back of the display. Then here's this one. This one was cool. I got it on eBay, but the problem with this one is there's no getter. It's gone to air. And there's the part number. It's unfortunate it has gone to air, but it is what it is. There's nothing I can do about it. There's one of those little Russian ones, Ukrainian ones. And all of these had that golden transistor, whatever they had, snipped off of them. So it was actually heavily documented. That being a problem. Oh yeah, here's a better look at that display. Might be able to see part numbers. Yeah, not really. I mean, anywho. Here we go. This one is weak. It's probably going to go away. But it's from a Technics RSB 54. So good parts though. This one is a cool one. This one's NEC FIP. The board itself, does it have a part number? Yeah, kind of. Right there. So we have you. This one is a Pioneer, but I don't know what unit this came out of. It was parted out because the screws are taped on it. Or something's taped on it, but whatever. Another one of those meters, same board. Actually, it's a slightly different design. One has an op amp, one doesn't. It's the same tube. That one is probably an SV 35, 36, 37, 3800 from a Pioneer. I actually bought this as a spare, but it turns out I didn't need it from one I was working on, so it just sits around. Another one, this is an RSM 216 display. Let's see, I can move the caps back. There's the part number. So, yep, we have that. So we're going to come around to the other side, and we have this one, which unfortunately has gone to air, so it's garbage. That one was a New Haven display. So, focus. There we go. New Haven display. Here's the one that the Chinese make. And they still sell these, I think. So you can still buy those. This is a Kai something or another. Cool little VFD. Don't know how good it is. Don't know how worn it is. This was an eBay purchase. And what I've done with eBay is when I see something I want on eBay, I'll leave it sit for a couple of weeks, maybe a month, to make sure nobody else is going to buy one to fix gear. And after that, I'll snap it up if I like it. So there's that. And then we have, this is just a little old, I don't know what this came out of. I have no idea. Handstar. This probably came out of a point of sale cash register or something. I don't know. There's the Pioneer amplifier VFD. There's the part number. So we have that. This is a cool one. I like it because of the density of the VU meter. I forget where this came from. I might have pulled it from something. I don't remember. That happens. Here's another cool one. It says BA 6146s, which are really easy to use. Fisher CA 276. Yeah, that was an eBay purchase because that's not my handwriting. Another one of those. Here's the part number. These are all the same as everything else, so I'm not going to pull those. And I like these. I got 3 of these. These are cute little VU meters. Okay. I think these are out of the HK1X models. Futaba. BG46, 96, I don't know. So there's that one, and there's this one, which is another Technics one with the AN6870 driver, which I don't know if I can pull. Yeah, AN6870, which is a peak level meter. And those have peak hold, so it'll hold the highest peaks until you toggle the reset line. And then here's our Sony display. Nice and cool. I have another one sitting on top of it. I don't know how, I forget where that came from. Actually, that was a pull from a dead receiver with a bad STK chip or something. Something was bad, I couldn't fix it. So that was a pull. And then that was an eBay purchase. Here's another one of these. This was one of my first acquisitions. Came out of a deck, part number. Let's see, we need a light. Shed some light on this situation. Yeah, so this one has the BA 6146s as well. And that's it. Pretty sure that is it for all of these. If I missed one, I'm sorry, but oh yeah, I forgot about you. I bought this one on eBay. This is a Kenwood GE 1100. And you know the neat thing about this one is it's an audio spectrum analyzer VFD, but it's analog. It uses an analog filter network. And it just multiplexes between them all. That is so neat. I got enough VFD displays to last a lifetime, but that's why I bought that one, just because of the uniqueness of the design. But yeah. Anywho, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. Until next time, guys, thank you for watching.